This is Marco with Tennis Pal, and this is the Tennis Minute. In the early 90s, Boris Becker and Goran Ivanisevic was one of the most hard-hitting rivalries on the ATP Tour. Goran, who at 6'4", was 1 inch taller than Boris, broke into the scene in the early 90s with a bomb of a serve. Meanwhile, Boris had been bombing his way out of trouble with his serve since 1985. It was only natural that these two would forge an extremely competitive rivalry. In all, they would meet 19 times, with Boris winning 10 and Goran winning 9. Here are the top 4 matches these two disputed. 1990 French Open first round. 1990 was Goran's breakout year on the tour, where he would establish himself as a top 10 player. The year prior, he'd finished ranked 40 in the world and reached the quarterfinals at the Australian Open. At the French Open, he'd be playing number 2 seed Boris Becker in what turned out to be a huge upset and massive win for Goran. Boris was arguably going through his best moment, having just finished number 2 in the world after claiming the 1989 Wimbledon and US Open. A star would be born in 1990 though, and Goran would beat Becker in 4 sets and then proceed to make it all the way to the quarterfinals. 1990 Wimbledon semifinals. Boris would not be shocked again by Goran a month later at Wimbledon. After all, he owned center court around this time. In 1990, Boris was the defending champion and had already won 3 Wimbledon titles. It would be a tough and contested 4-set semifinal, which would include 2 tiebreaks. Becker would move on to the finals, whereas Goran would have to wait a couple of more years. 1994 Wimbledon semifinals. Fast forward to 4 years later, and by this time, Boris had not won a Wimbledon title since 1989. Meanwhile, Goran had established himself in the top 5. Goran came in as the 4th seed, while Boris was the 7th seed. Boris would go down in 3 straight sets to an inspired Goran. Unlucky for Goran, he would lose his 2nd Wimbledon final in 3 years to Pete Sampras. It would take Goran another 7 years to finally taste victory at Wimbledon. As for Big Boris, he would suffer the same fate as Goran the following year, losing in the final to Pete Sampras. 1994 ATP Masters Stockholm final. This tournament will be forever associated with the fact that Boris Becker beat the top 3 players in the world on the way to the title. He beat world number 3 Michael Stich in the quarters, world number 1 Pete Sampras in the semis, and world number 2 Goran Ivanisevic in the final. This would be sweet revenge for the Wimbledon semifinal loss for Boris and would re-establish Boris as still a force to be reckoned with on the ATP Tour. Like always, don't forget to jump on the Tennis Pal app to stay up to date on tennis news, find groups of friends to play with, and get a virtual coach to help with your tennis game.